Today I'm speaking with Jim Finley, whose books include Merton's Palace of Nowhere and a book on Christian meditation, Experiencing the Presence of God. Jim earned degrees from the University of Akron, St. John College, and the Fuller Theological Seminary. He's a husband, father, writer, and psychotherapist in private practice. With Sounds True, Jim has created an audio series on Meister Eckhart's Living Wisdom, as well as a series on Christian meditation. Jim, thank you so much for joining us for the Meditation Summit. Thank you.
Good. Thank you for having me. It's good.
Let's begin, Jim, with this question of meditation in the Christian tradition. I think for many people that's a new idea. What's your sense of what it means to meditate as a Christian?
Yes. My understanding of meditation in the Christian tradition comes from what I learned when I was in the monastery. When I graduated from high school, I entered the cloistered Trappist monastery of the Abbey of Gethsemani in Kentucky. I had read Thomas Merton's books and was very drawn to that, and I went there to live that life and received direction from him, and then through Thomas Merton was introduced to the teachings of the Christian mystics on contemplative prayer as a way of coming to this profound experience of God's oneness with us in life itself. And so I'm coming out of this monastic, contemplative, mystical lineage or heritage in the Christian tradition that goes all the way back to the Desert Fathers, the Desert Mothers, in the 2nd and 3rd century through the medieval mystics, Francis of Assisi and Clare and John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila and Eckhart, and all the way up through Merton. So I'm speaking out of that, out of those traditions.
Can you share with us what you think might be some of the unique features of Christian meditation from other kinds of approaches to meditation that perhaps people are more familiar with, mindfulness practice, Buddhist meditation, etc.?
Well, I would say that the practice of meditation is universal. That is, one finds in all world religions traditions or guidelines for meditation, and at two different levels. There's meditation as discursive meditation, such as prayerfully reflecting on biblical text or sutras or whatever that reflective process is, discursive meditation. And there's also traditions where meditation leads to states of oneness with the divine beyond all thoughts and images. And so what's specific then to each tradition is that it draws from its own specifically historically cultural language to express meditating in these ways. So the Buddhists would refer to this in terms of the Four Noble Truths of the Buddha and the Eightfold Path, and the Hindu and Raja Yoga, sacred yoga, I am that, namaste, in terms of the Bhagavad Gita and the traditions of the Upanishads, and in Judaism it would be the Kabbalah and this mystical understanding of Torah. And so what we have in Christian meditation then is a specific Christian language for the universal capacity of the human spirit to experience infinite oneness with the infinite mystery of the divine. And so what's specific about it is a specifically Christian language for this universal experience.
Can you go ahead, Jim, and give us a little bit of the sense of the practice we're about to do, maybe a brief description?
Yes, let me give a sense of, lead right into the flavor of this. I think one way that helps me to move into what we're talking about is to, we find in the writings of Thomas Merton, and really throughout this contemplative literature, inviting us to reflect on moments where we become fleetingly aware of oneness with God, one with us in life itself. And so there are moments in the midst of nature, like lying awake at night listening to the rain, or smelling a blood-red rose, or intimacy with the beloved, or solitude, being all alone with no addictive props or escapes, or the pause between two lines of a poem. It can come in birth, it can come in death, or sorrow, or joy. But from time to time, we can experience a fleeting, it is as if we find our way into a kind of a clearing in which we're aware in some profound way we can't explain that nothing is missing anywhere, that fear has no foundations, like what a fool I am to worry so. And when it's actually happening, it's often, sometimes it can be very intense, but it's often very subtle. But it's just deep sense that when it's actually happening, it's too self-evident to doubt. It is too deep to comprehend. And Thomas Merton once said, he said, the most important things of all are the things we can't explain to anybody, including ourselves. We have to assent to it as being true, or we go crazy inside. And as Dan Walsh used to say at the monastery, he taught philosophy to the monks at the monastery. See, I know it, I know it, I know that I know it. The trouble is, it's I who know that I know it. And what do I know? That in my most childlike hour, my heart has not deceived me, and I have experienced directly for myself that God is closer to me than I am to myself. Or you might put it another way, it's a moment in which we realize that although I am not God, I'm not other than God either. Although I'm not any of you, I'm not other than any of you either. Although I am not the earth, I'm not other than the earth either. And there is that experience. Now, these experiences, they come and go. I think everyone has these from time to time. But what can happen in the hearts of some people is a desire for more daily abiding awareness of the depths so fleetingly glimpsed. That is, in my most childlike hour, I have rested in the oneness without which my life will be forever incomplete. Yet I, by my own finite powers, am powerless to attain that oneness because it's infinite. And therefore, what am I to do? It's this desire in which one becomes a seeker on the ancient path looking for realization. See how, this is the dilemma, that I feel within my heart a desire that I do not understand, for a oneness that I do not understand. But I know that it is real because I've tasted it directly for myself. And where can I find trustworthy guidance in consummating this desire? And this is where one is so delighted to discover there are mystics, because the great mystics bear witness that it is possible to live in this habitual, unitive state of the God-given, godly nature of every breath and heartbeat. And mystic teachers offer trustworthy guidance in it. And they focus our attention then on a particularly intimate way to practice meditation. And that's what I want to talk about here. The dilemma is that there's this imperative of my awakened heart. See, how can I consummate this desire for this infinite union with the infinite that has awakened within me? And my dilemma is that it's so clear that I, by my finite powers, am powerless to attain the infinite. Now, I do know, and I'm encouraged by the fact, that although I'm powerless to attain the infinite attains me in my powerlessness to attain it. This is what happens to me in the arms of the beloved, or holding the newborn infant, or listening to the rain. There are certain moments, this kind of delightful serendipity, where I'm kind of overtaken by what utterly transcends my ability to attain it, and then it dissipates. So the question then is for me, how can I move in the direction of a more daily abiding awareness of the depths so fleetingly glimpsed? How can I learn to let that become habitual, so it becomes the habitual underlying way of experiencing everything that I experience? And since I can't, by my own powers, attain it, that is, I can't force my way through, because the only thing the ego can attain is ego. But here's the key, here's the great insight. It's true I cannot attain it, but I can assume the inner stance that offers the least resistance to be overtaken by what I cannot attain. Lovers cannot attain their moments of oceanic oneness, but together they can assume the stance that offers the least resistance to be overtaken by the gift of oceanic oneness that fulfills them in all they do in their life together. The poet cannot attain the gift of poetry, but the poet can assume the inner stance that offers the least resistance to the flow of the poetry that gifts the poet and all who care to listen. Those committed to healing cannot make healing happen, but those committing to healing can assume the inner stance that offers the least resistance to the gift of healing. All transformative acts have this contemplative art form about them. That what we're seeking is essentially passive. That is, we receive it as a gift, but it's also active, but it's a paradoxical activity of the art form of assuming the least resistance, assuming the stance that offers the least resistance to be overtaken by what we cannot attain. And this is practice. The meditation practice is how we learn to master and be mastered by this art form. And if we turn to each of the mystics, I'm going to share a method now that I find personally helpful. In each of the classical texts of the mystics, they offer simple guidelines for the person who has come to this paradoxical, mysterious place in their life. And this is really the essence of the matter, I think, of meditation in the Christian tradition.
Beautiful. Let's keep going. I want to know more experientially about how I take this stance of absolute least resistance.
Exactly. Because, see, I think when the seeker hears this, they resonate with it. And so the question then for the seeker is, how do I get past words about it to guidance in the actual experience of it? So I would now like to, so each mystic with endless variations, but in essence, they all have this same tonal quality to them. So I'll now kind of walk through this process. First, I think it's to come to meditation. Thomas Merton said somewhere, he said, with God, a little sincerity goes a long, long way. And the essence of the practice is sincerity. And so we sit in a quiet place in which there's no agenda, but to give ourselves in love to the infinite love that gives itself to us with every breath and heartbeat. That is, there is no agenda here, but love alone. And this is the sincerity or the purity of the intention. And we start first with our body, because it's an act, this act of least resistance to be overtaken by the gift of infinite union with the infinite. It's grounded in our body. And so the guidelines are first to sit still. And sitting still is practical, because we can learn from our body how to be. By sitting still, we can learn to be still. But the interiority of the practice is to sit still with all our heart. And we sit still with all our heart to bear witness to ourselves and to the whole world that there's no place to go. That what I'm looking for is like a hidden axis that runs down through the center of my body, through the center of the universe. I know it's true because I'm awakened to it in my moments of awakening. So everything that I'm searching for is right here, and therefore there is no place to go. And so I sit still. And also I sit still because the stillness is the stillness of death. And it's dying to the last trace of finding security or identity in anything less or other than an infinite union with infinite love. And so there's a kind of a radical, humble, visceral sincerity that's incarnate in stillness. Next, I sit straight. Usually in ego consciousness, when we're alert, we're kind of tense. And when we get very relaxed, we're inclined to fall asleep. Here we're trying to be completely awake and completely relaxed at once. And here's the image I have of this that helps me get in touch with this. Imagine a mother holding her little newborn infant during the night, and the baby's crying. And finally the baby falls asleep. The mother takes the baby in, lays the baby in the bed, and gently slides her hand out from under the baby, being as careful as possible not to wake it up. Now, sometimes when I lead meditation retreats, I look down the rows of people sitting, and especially if they're sitting after lunch on a hot day kind of thing, you see a lot of people like nodding off to sleep, and they kind of, where they jerk themselves upright, kind of. And here, see, sitting straight, this is my sense of it. When I'm aware that I'm kind of slumping over in my practice, I'm to renew the straightness of my posture with the same delicate, respectful sensitivity with which the mother slides her hand out from under the baby. Because the extraordinary discovery is that God is the infinity of that delicacy. That is, for a long time, I think I'm looking for something, like I'm waiting for something to happen. What surprises me is the radical nearness giving itself to me in something as simple as the heartfelt sincerity with which I renew my posture. That God is the infinity of that act, and that act is the incarnate immediacy of God. And in this sense, I sit straight. Next. I close my eyes, or I lower my eyes to the floor. Some people find it most natural to close their eyes. Other people get a lot of imagery and find it distracting. And so they find it most helpful to keep their eyes lowered towards the ground, or to gaze at a mandala, to gaze at a sacred image. In the Christian tradition, it would be a cross or an icon, or it could be a flower from outside, whatever is a focal point. And this is the act of gazing. Lord, Jesus said, you have eyes to see and you do not see. I don't see what? I don't see God in everything that I see. I don't see the God-given godly stature of everything that I see. And so my eyes, and when I lower my eyes to the ground, I'm praying with my eyes. See, Lord, that I might see. If I'm looking down at the palms of my hands turned up in my lap as I sit. See, I sit gazing into the palms of my hands, knowing and trusting that it's possible to see, that is, to realize that God's the infinity of the concrete immediacy of the palms of my hands, the mystery of it. See, Lord, that I might see. And my hands are resting. The next guideline is to have your hands resting in a comfortable position in your lap. Sometimes people have their hands resting in a meaningful position, but in some traditions like mudra, so some people will fold their hands over their chest like this, or some people have their hands folded in prayer. Some people have their hands on their laps with their palms up, kind of expressing an openness to God. But the essence of it is to have your hands resting in a comfortable position in your lap, because this is Sabbath. This is Sabbath. That is, this is not a work achieved with human hands. It's true that if I do not seek it with all my heart, it might not happen to me. But it's also true that if it does happen to me, it will not be the result of my effort, because it is not the result of anything. It arises unexplainably as a pure gift. And so this is this paradoxical activity of a kind of a sublime activity of receptive waiting. And so my hands resting in my lap kind of incarnate practice. And then there's my breath, my breathing. Breathing in and breathing out. I used to keep a sign on my desk at home. I used to say, inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. It doesn't get on the to-do list, but try going without it, see how the chores go. The intuition is that we're running roughshod over the infinite unity that we're looking for, that's giving itself to us in every breath and heartbeat. And so I listen to my breathing. God breathed into Adam the gift of life. And in this very moment, God is breathing into me this very gift of the divinity of God being given to me as the divinity of my own life and my nothingness without God. And then when I exhale myself in love. That is, I give myself in love to the love that with each inhalation is giving itself to me. And this reciprocity of love incarnate in the breath is the power of the breath to incarnate this stance of sustained receptivity to what offers the least resistance. So the guidelines of the body then lead into the guidelines of the mind. And the guideline of the mind is to be present, open, and awake, neither clinging to nor rejecting anything. I sit in meditation, and by the way, there's something else about this too, on the guideline of sitting for 20 to 30 minutes. The thing about it is, I think also, is that when we sit like this, we engage in any activity with sustained attentiveness. The level of consciousness at which we began to practice begins to yield and give way to a qualitatively deeper, more interior consciousness that grants access to and is accessed by qualitatively deeper, more interior dimensions of the concreteness of the act that we're engaged in. And so when I sit in practice, the essence of practice is not a method, it's what happens to me when I sit with all my heart in this sustained stance. And I can feel, I experience it as like falling backwards in slow motion. It's like a quiet kind of descent into a qualitatively deeper, more interior consciousness of accessing and being accessed by qualitatively deeper, more interior dimensions of the gift and miracle of the concrete immediacy of sitting here. And what all this can lead to, by the way, in this interiority of this intimacy, I can then intuit that the depths into which I'm descending bottom out or drop down into the bottomless abyss of God, welling up and giving herself away, giving himself away completely in and as the concrete immediacy of me sitting here just the way I am, at which point it becomes mystical. And so with respect to the mind, the stance of least resistance to this kind of opening to this kind of oneness, I'm to be present, open, and awake, neither clinging to nor rejecting anything. And so when I sit, I'll notice a thought arises. And I'm not trying to stop thinking, which would be the ego posing itself upon me. And I'm trying not to think about the thoughts that arise. I'm practicing stepping back, that when thought arises, I'm to be aware of thought arising. If I just watch it, thought arises, it endures, and it passes away. A thought arises, it endures and passes away. An emotion arises, sadness, inner sweetness, just confusion, whatever it might be. And the feeling arises and endures and passes away. So too with bodily perceptions, so too with all that arises in my mind, all that endures in my mind, and all that passes away, all of it. And as I sit this way, no matter how pleasant or profound it is that arises, I am not to cling to it, because it's infinitely less than what I'm looking for. Likewise, no matter how painful it is, I am not to reject it. I'm to be even-minded towards all that arises. I'm to be respectful, even reverential, towards all that arises, all that endures, and all that passes away within me. Just like this day is arising, this day is enduring, this day is passing away. Just like my life on this earth is arising, my life on this earth is enduring, and my life on this earth is passing away. And there's this extraordinary realization that God is the infinity of this arising, God is the infinity of this enduring, and God is the infinity of this passing away. And so this is the practice in the mind. And we need to be very patient with this. It's I think we have to be drawn to do it. It is so subtle, and it is the stance of least resistance to what transcends thought by the awareness of thought without thinking the thoughts that arise and so on. And then the last guideline of this is compassion. And compassion is non-judgment. See, we're to sit neither clinging to nor rejecting anything. Compassion is tender-hearted love towards ourselves as we discover ourselves clinging to and rejecting everything. For what happens in this, I think, is that we're not up to it. We are not up to it. We're kind of in water over our head. We discover how inept we are in this. But the key is that if we catch ourselves in the act of perpetuating violence on the part of us that needs to be loved the most, the part of me that doesn't know how to do this, the part of me that's half-hearted about this. And so I learn not to perpetuate violence like a shame attack upon myself for not meditating effectively. And likewise, neither do I quit, meaning I do not abandon myself as precious in my ineptness. And what I discover in meditation then, I discover the source of all violence in the world in my own heart. And I discover the healing of that violence in my own heart. To not abandon nor attack the invincible preciousness of that which is most lost and broken within ourselves and other people and in the world. Compassion. And this is the practice. Now, what helps me in this is a tradition of using a word. One finds this in the Jesus prayer, the Philokalia, the way of a pilgrim. We find it in the Cloud of Unknowing. And the word that helps me, and you kind of find the word that is just like practice a mantra. You find a word that resonates with your heart. And the word that resonates with me is the words, I love you. So let's say I'm sitting like this. And so when I inhale, I listen to God's silent, I love you, breathing into me the gift of my very life and my nothingness without God. See, that if we think of God as generosity, that I am the generosity of God. And when I inhale the generosity of God breathing into me the gift of my life and my nothingness without God. And then when I exhale myself, like with all my heart. I exhale my silent, I love you, giving myself in love to the love that with the next inhalation gives itself to me. Now, as I sit this way, I'm sitting here this way, and let's say I become aware that there's pain in my body, and same pain in my legs, or whatever it is I may be feeling pain. So when I inhale God loving me through and through and through and through, pain and all. And when I exhale, I give myself pain and all to the love that loves me, pain and all. Likewise, I'm sitting here, and let's say I'm sad about something. Maybe it's understandable I would be sad about it. And so when I inhale God loving me through and through and through and through, sadness and all. And when I exhale, I give myself in love, sadness and all, to the love that loves me, sadness and all. So too with confusion, so too with discouragement, so too with the feeling of not getting anywhere, so too with whatever. And little by little, I can experience for myself the unsubstantiality of everything but love. That love alone is real. Love alone is the substance that is the reality of stones and trees and stars and standing up and sitting down. That realization, the divinity of the concrete immediacy of what is the mystical experience. And little by little, I can learn to mystically experience everything that I experience. That is, when I end my practice, I can ask God for the grace not to break the thread of this awareness, so that when I stand up, I might viscerally or intuitively sense the God-given godly stature of standing up. And if I meet someone in the hallway, viscerally I can be aware of the God-given godly stature, of the simplicity of talking with this person in a hallway. And little by little, I can become habituated in this unitive state. So eventually all my life becomes practice. That is, little by little, I've habituated this practice as the underlying constancy of everything I experience. And this is really then to become a healing presence in the midst of the world. and which is the fruit of practice, which is Christ consciousness in the world. So that's my sense of it.
Jim, it's interesting that you brought forward this phrase, Christ consciousness, here at the end of the experience of Christian meditation in the way that you've introduced us to it. I was curious how one's relationship with Jesus, often seen as so central in Christianity, how that plays a role in your approach to meditation.
Yes. I think there's several aspects to this. One aspect is this, is that the Christian understanding of creation, kind of the poetry of creation, is that from all eternity, God the Father, God Mother, God the Source, God the Father is eternally expressing himself as the Word, the Logos, the Word of God. And God is eternally contemplating himself in the Word. And God contemplates in the Word, the second person of the Trinity, the Word who becomes flesh in the historical Jesus, to Christian belief. God eternally contemplates in the Word who I am in Christ before the origins of the universe. That is, this is who I am hidden with Christ in God before God created me. Because God never, 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 never did not know who I am. And this me that God knows that I am is the unborn me that never wasn't. And the unborn me that never wasn't is the me that will never die. So that when God creates me on this earth by giving me a human nature, endowed with the capacity to recognize the person, and in recognizing it, I can then freely assent to it in love. I'm freely assenting, I'm joining God in knowing who God knows me to be in Christ before I was born. And that's my Christ nature, this Trinitarian Christ nature. Now the historical Jesus and who walked the earth is Jesus of Nazareth, and the Christian for the devout Christian, is that the historical Jesus is put this way, is that Jesus spent whole nights in prayer. Jesus spent whole nights in this communion that we're talking about. And he walked out and he walked the earth looking for people. And when he met someone, he approached them in their suffering. And he acknowledged their suffering. He responded to it. They had leprosy, or their daughter died, or they were a prostitute, or whatever it was. He addressed that. But Jesus saw that the root of their suffering was not their leprosy or their pot, whatever it is. Jesus saw that they were thinking they were wrong. They were thinking they were what was wrong with them, that they were a walking mistake, or that their suffering had the power to name who they are. So Jesus sees the suffering, sees through the suffering, to who they are in him before the origins of the universe. Like, I know you. And reflected in his eyes, they see their true face before they were born, which is experiential salvation. That taste of experiential salvation, that deathless identity, that transsubjective communion of oneness with God revealed in Christ, is the Christ nature. And through the power of the Spirit who dwells in my heart, I can learn to become habituated in it and cultivate it through the practice of meditation. And then I can go out and share it with people by becoming someone in my presence. I see who they are. And I acknowledge who they are. They're like me, they're just a human being. But I can see through the details of the hurting place, to see in them the deathless preciousness of themselves before they were born. So reflected in my eyes, that is in my respect for them, or my compassion for them, my tenderness towards them, they can experience this inner healing that liberates them. It's freedom from the tyranny of suffering in the midst of suffering, freedom from the tyranny of the death in the midst of death. And I'm calling that Christ consciousness.
Now, I'm also curious, Jim, if somebody had the experience doing this meditation of surrendering to a degree, like they kept releasing, their hands are open on their lap. There's this
Yes.
sense of surrendering more and more any resistance, and yet still finding some part of them that couldn't quite let go,
Yeah.
if you will.
Yeah.
How do we relate to that part of us, the part of
Yeah.
us that's just still holding on?
Yeah, that's the experience, actually. Thomas Merton once put it this way. I'll paraphrase it. He says, we tell God, I'm really, really serious about this mystical union business, really, with you, under one condition, that when I cross the finish line in this mystical union, my ego will remain intact, so I can become a mystical ego and finally get the respect I deserve. That what we're trying to do, what it is, we're afraid to lose the control that we think that we have over the life that we think that we're living. We want it more than anything. But there's that in us that sees it, and there's that in us that doesn't see it yet. See, the part that's still afraid, that's still reactive, that's still that can't help itself, it doesn't know how to do any better. So what we're trying to do is to be ruthlessly honest and infinitely tender toward that hurting place within us. Because if we try to force it, we're doing violence to ourselves. If we walk away, we're betraying ourselves. It's like this in human love. Sometimes people who feel they're falling in love, like suddenly it's getting a lot bigger than they thought it would. And there's that in them that's delighted to do it. It's like they can't believe it's true. But there's also that which is afraid, especially if they've been hurt or they've been abandoned in the past. And so this is this art. Talk about the stance that offers the least resistance to be overtaken by it. And that's that tender-hearted presence to the part that's still afraid. And here's the poetic image I use for this, is that we struggle and struggle and struggle. And the image I have is we imagine we're trying to form some great feat, like, say, a high jumper jumping over a high bar. And we exhaust ourselves. It's just too high. We can't get over it. We can't do it. And when we're spent in our inability to achieve it, including getting past our fears and resistance to what we're looking for, an unexpected thing happens. Love steps out and places the bar flat on the ground. Approaching the bar, bewildered by the simplicity of the task, we trip over it and we fall into God's arms. That this is, sometimes in the Christian tradition, this is called the gift of tears, is that one comes to the end of effort. And in coming to the end of effort, instead of an impasse, one discovers the possibility of a great surrender in which we're lifted up and carried along by the love that loves us so in our powerlessness. So that art form of wanting it, yet I'm afraid of wanting it. And by the way, I think this fidelity to this practice, any practitioner knows this. This is a way of life. It isn't like I'm going to give it a go, and if I don't make it by Thursday, I'll quit. This becomes a quiet resolve to practice this day by day, month by month, year by year, and slowly kind of soaks down and starts permeating every moment of our life.
One other question, Jim. You talked about how we have to give up, in a sense, this drive to rationally know and understand what we're experiencing in meditation through that discursive part of our mind. And as you were talking about that, I was thinking about the classic Christian text, the Cloud of Unknowing. And this is often a text that people refer to, in my experience, when they're talking about meditating in the Christian tradition. And I wonder, as an end note, if you can talk some about that unknowing process as you experience it.
Yes. Yes, The Cloud of Unknowing, written by an anonymous author in the 14th century England and popularized today for the meditative Christian community by Thomas Keating, Basil. I think Thomas Keating mainly today. I can't remember his name right now. We did this with them, Centering Prayer movement, contemplative outreach. How it's expressed in The Cloud of Unknowing. The Cloud of Unknowing says, he said, the desire is to know God naked as he is in himself. That is not ideas of God we were not created by God to think about God. We were created by God for God beyond all ideas of God. And therefore the practice for the cloud of unknowing is to sit in this intention, this naked intention to pass beyond all ideas of God, using one's word. And he calls it a cloud of unknowing because he says, although thought cannot attain God, one act of love reaches God, and God reaches us through love. And so I'm sitting, here, I'll put it this way. Here's how I put it in the cloud of unknowing. Notice that when you don't know someone very well, how easy it is to say a lot about them. Well, let me tell you about so-and-so. When we've loved someone very, very deeply for a long, long time, we hardly know what to say. And our heart breaks when we try. And we know no matter what we say, it wouldn't be what we know because we can't say it. And that's the unknowing. See, the unknowing is that intimate, unitive oneness. It is not reducible to any conceptualization, definition, explanation whatsoever. Like, pardon me, I don't speak English. But when someone this touched me too. When I left the monastery, I wrote a letter to Dan Walsh, who taught philosophy, and I asked, how can I share this with people out here? Which I put in the last chapter of my book, Merton's Palace of Nowhere, on the Insight. And Dan Walsh wrote back to me, and he said, you cannot communicate this, but it will communicate itself through you if you're convinced in what you say, but it will not be you communicating it. And it'll be communicating itself because there'll be a response in the listener. That is, a depth from which the words come in the speaker cause that same depth to resonate in the listener, and each unto each, Merton calls a spiritual communication. There's a recognition or a resonance. But that which is recognized is that which neither the speaker nor the listener can say. And so every word of the Cloud of Unknowing, when we open a book like the Cloud of Unknowing, and when we read it, it's so beautiful. He says that in the prologue. He says, those who read this book, I believe, will be greatly encouraged and reassured. It's because everything the author of the Cloud says comes out of this deep place that evokes this deep yes. Like when we're actually in the flow of it, it's like listening to music. When we're actually in the flow of it, it's so clear. But then when we try to turn to explain to someone what it was that was clear, we don't know what to say. That's unknowing.
And just one final question for you here, Jim. You talked about, as we entered the practice of Christian meditation, sincerity, the sincerity of the heart, and how this was really the key to beginning and stepping into the practice. And I'm curious if you can give us any pointers, any tips. Let's say somebody tunes into their heart and they feel pockets of sincerity and then pockets of coldness or cut-offness. How can they become more fully? How can we, each of us, how can I become more fully sincere?
Yeah, I want to say that's how I experienced it in therapy. And it carries over to contemplative spiritual direction, and then how we apply it to ourselves, and how meditation kind of brings this up. Let's say you come to me and you want to talk about such things. And when you talk about such things, you start to open up and try to start to express what's going on with you. And out of the dialogue, out of your talking, I ask questions. And the questions are such that you can't respond without listening more deeply to yourself. And it gets to a certain place of sincere vulnerability. How I put it, it's a moment where you come out from behind the curtain and you risk letting me see you as you are in kind of the intimate edge of the question itself. See? I can see it in your eyes. I can hear it in your voice. It's like right there. And then you say to me this, I'm so sincere about it, meaning I want this so. I want this so. But to be quite honest with you, it kind of burdens me why I'm so consistently unfaithful to this. That is what I can't figure out, is how can something so important to me be something that gets so easily set aside by the concerns of the moment. And then I say back to you, what touches me is how sincere you are about how difficult it is to have your sustained sincerity. And so the paradox then, this is this idea of poverty of spirit. The sincerity arises in the intimacy of acknowledging to oneself the ways in which one doesn't know how to, or one is afraid to be sincere. That humble self-knowledge, like know thyself. And then that leads deeper. See, then I say, well, I wonder what would happen. See, I think being sincere is coded language for still afraid. I'm still afraid. I'm not completely sincere is coded language for I'm afraid of what will happen to me if I give myself over to this, but I'm even more afraid of what happened to me if I don't. But the alchemy of the crest of the wave meeting you right where you're at, in the sincerity and your lack of sincerity, we bring that into our practice, and that's where the transformation happens. That's what makes it incarnate and makes it real, I think.
Jim, thank you so much for being part of the Meditation Summit and bringing Christian meditation to the Meditation Summit. Thank you so much.